My name is Toussaint Morrison, and today we are going to be having a virtual town hall forum in cooperation and collaboration with our MPS, COPAL, and several other groups that I want to have people introduce them on their own. I will be moderating the discussion, and today we'll be talking about unpacking concerns about the comprehensive district design that's being rolled out by the Minneapolis Public Schools, Minneapolis Public School Board. And part of the conversation is trying to understand exactly what the comprehensive district design exactly is, and then kind of asserting how we feel about that moving forward, as exactly what the CDD is been somewhat of a concern in the miscommunication of it. So without any more delay, I'm going to introduce the panelists that are going to be speaking today. Michael Dueñas, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself? You're on mute right now, so if you hit that button, you can be unmuted and we'll hear you.
All right. Hello, my name is Michael Dueñas. I have a son in the Seward Montessori School. My mother went to Minneapolis Public Schools, and I'm a longtime administrator in higher education, currently doing diversity and equity training, but my specialty area has been focused on Chicano studies and political science.
All right, and Zeinab Omar, you're on mute right now, but if you want to unmute, you can introduce yourself to us.
Hi, my name is Zeinab Omar. I am a mother of two. I have two at Barton Elementary. I'm also a bilingual 8 Somali associate educator, as well as various other hats I wear at Barton Elementary. And I'm also have a license in EL language learners.
All right, thank you, Zeinab. Nakima Levy-Armstrong, do you want to introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Nakima Levy-Armstrong. I am a civil rights attorney. I'm a longtime advocate for education justice, racial justice, and economic justice. I'm also the founder of the Racial Justice Network, and I'm happy to be here with you all tonight.
Thank you. All right, and Francisco Segovia.
Yes. I'm Francisco Segovia. I am the executive director of COPAL, Comunidades, Organizando, Empower and Action for Latinos. And I also father of 3 kids. 2 graduated already from Minneapolis Public Schools and 1 attending Dowling Environmental School.
All right. And lastly, Silvia Ibáñez, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Hello, I'm Silvia Ibáñez, and I have 2 kids at Minneapolis Public School, Barton and Windom, and I'm a teacher at Minneapolis Public School at Emerson. And I'm part of a Latino parents group. Yeah. Hello, everybody.
Right. Okay. And welcome everybody to the forum, and really look forward to not only hearing your thoughts, but your understanding on what the CDD is. As Nakima and I discussed earlier in the conversation, just the understanding of what it is, I think is a feat in and of itself. And I think it's going to benefit everybody that's listening to hear what that is and what it may be going forward, and if it's going to change. So to start, Nakimi, do you want to give us an overview of what the CDD and the plan that is due to be voted on May 12th at a school board meeting?
Sure. So from my understanding, the comprehensive district design plan has been in the works for probably a couple of years through the Minneapolis public school system, but it was only unveiled to the public very recently. If I recall correctly, the most recent version came forward at the end of March. And for those of you who are at home, you know that we're in the midst of a global pandemic. And most of us have not had the opportunity to hear from the district specifically how this plan will impact our children and our families. It is a very radical plan in terms of how it will reshape and redesign Minneapolis public schools. It has a significant potential of disrupting thousands of children. The district has come back with different estimates, initially saying over 60% of children would be impacted. And now they are trying to bring the number down in terms of the number of students that they think will be impacted. But the reality is that we know that thousands of children may have to switch schools or be bused to different schools. Popular magnet programs are going to be relocated to the center of the city. There's just a variety of things that are happening. So in other words, a lot of moving parts. that are in place with regard to the CDD. And because of all of these moving parts, what we are asking the district to do is to delay voting on the CDD. They were originally set to vote on the plan on April 28th. We put a petition out that has over 3,000 signatures. And most recently, the district is now saying it's going to vote on May 12th. And we think that with all of the changes that the district is proposing, not to mention the astronomical price tag associated with implementing the CDD, they need to delay the vote until full public participation can happen, which means that the district leaders need to stand up and present the plan and all of the components of the plan, allow the public to ask critical questions, as well as weigh in person on the plan. It's our children and our community that will be impacted by what the district is doing. And so we're just here today trying to raise awareness about what's going on and to say that enough is enough. We're tired of the district making changes about us without us.
Okay, and then I want to get to that astronomical price tag at some point, but just to get everybody's general concern with what Nikema just rolled out as with the CDD is, I want to start with you, Francisco. What is your general concern with the comprehensive district design, just in a nutshell?
Sure. First of all, I want to say that today is Earth Day. It's an important day for everyone around the world.
Mm-hmm.
Our Earth needs to be protected. Mm-hmm. And second of all, it is I want to mention and I want to send my love to a cousin who lost her mom today due to COVID-19. Mm-hmm. And last week, unfortunately, she had to bury her husband. All happened in New York. And so I know that she's not the only one. There are thousands of people around this world who are being impacted by this pandemic that has brought a lot of suffering to a lot of people. But mm-hmm. most important of these, let's keep in mind that a lot of the people who suffer for pandemics like this are the frontliners. And the frontliners are the people who are growing our food, who are unprotected, are the people who are cleaning places, who are unprotected, and obviously nurses as well. But those people who are unprotected are going to be brown and black people who are at the bottom of our economic system, who are earning little money, who don't have health insurance. And if you look at the United States right now, for instance, brown and black people are the ones who are suffering the biggest consequences of this pandemic. With that in mind, when we look about what's going on with our Minneapolis, with our public educational system, let's think about the parents who are right now thinking about how they are going to pay rent, thinking they're going to be able to bring food to the table, thinking that they don't have health insurance in case hopefully they don't get sick. So those are the parents that we're going to be speaking about that today. Those are the parents who, instead of thinking, oh, should I go and support or vote against or in favor of the district CDD, they are busy thinking about how they're going to protect their family.
Yeah.
So right now, that's key for us as we move forward.
And that's a great point that you make. I mean, we would be remiss to not mention the current circumstances and how they're affecting everybody, but also how they're affecting people of color, people that are basically under the thumb of stratification, and also having to mind the CDD at the same time, if you have the privilege to do that, which is an interesting point. Michael Dueñas, I want to get your general concern with the CDD going forward.
Yeah, I have two main concerns. One are around the issues of equity. As a person of color, Mexican American, my big issue has always been, what's the district doing to help people of color do better in school and really reduce that opportunity gap between students of color and white students. This plan, as it's rolled out, it's not clear that it's going to do much of anything except move students around. They give lip service to say, we're going to have ethnic studies, but ethnic studies doesn't have a budget item. They're not budgeting to really give the funds to address the achievement gap and the opportunity gap for how are we going to teach students of color better in the district. The other part is the fiscal. The way it's rolled out, we have no idea what the current expenses are, what the current revenue is. They're just giving us figures that aren't anchored in any reality right now, as based on the material the board has given us and Ed Graff's administration has given us. that's hugely problematic because we don't know if the expenses are accurate that they're reporting. The transportation costs just changed suddenly this weekend with no explanation. They've increased, I think it went up to 46 million from 36 million. What just happened in the last week? And if you didn't keep on top of some of the material that's being released, you would have no idea. And so I'll just leave it there. We'll get more into some of the financial aspects later.
Absolutely. Zeinab, I want to get to your general concerns about the CDD, please.
Coming from a Somali parent speaking, I feel like the gap that has been played out several times when it comes to the achievement gap between the whites and the Latinos and the African American / the Somalis, which come under African American. That gap is something that worries a lot of our African American parents, especially the Somalis. And with that said, that with this CDD change, there is no solution to that. As in fact, I feel, and also speaking to other families, this gap will actually widen. It will get actually worsened because of several reasons. Barton Elementary, which is magnet school, has a lot of Somali-speaking families that go there, and one of the reasons that they chose that school is because of that gap. It helped that gap to shrink it within that school because of the magnet, because of the open progressive, because of the K-8 magnet. All that stuff works well with it. But now that with the CDD change that's foreseen, it would actually worsen that, and a lot of parents, their number one concern would that be is the gap between the Latinos and the African American and whites, like I've said. But I've spoken to a lot of families, especially I'm talking about from the Somali American families. A lot of parents have several concerns, but that obviously it's one of the concern is the gap. They want to stay in Barton. They want to stay in Barton all the way to K-8. And with this change, obviously changing to K-5 zoning within Barton, shrinking, that's a lot of issues. And also my number one disappointed when from the Minneapolis Public School is that the Somali families actually found out right before the pandemic. We're talking about maybe a couple weeks, 3 weeks ahead before the pandemic. And that's a very serious concern that a lot of families have, and it's oftentimes they're overseen because they're not English speakers. No one has reached out to them. They were confused right before we went on the pandemic. There was a lot of confusion that was going on with the CDD. All about the language that they've actually written, that they translated, does not make sense to these families. No one actually sat down with them and explained it to them. There's a lot of concern, but from what I'm understanding and from the ones that I've actually contacted, what I've tried to explain the little bit that I know was that gap kept coming up.
Okay, and I do want to get to Barton and also the Somali families hearing just before the pandemic. But finally, Silvia Ibáñez, can we get your general concern on the CDD, please? And you're on mute right now, so if you want to unmute, then we'll be able to hear you. Yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's okay.
Well, I'm very concerned because this plan started with the transportation logistics study. Mm-hmm. So it's not based in the needs of our community. If you look at the programs that are gonna be changed, the Latino community have a very big impact. So 75% of Spanish language learners, students in K-8 are gonna be moved to another school. Okay. And because they are putting all the students of colors in one path, they don't really set what is gonna happen with the Latino students. Okay. And we see that the Latino students are gonna be very impacted with this. And I'm very concerned about that.
And what I'm curious to know, Silvia, how did that come about? Your understanding of 75% of, did you say 75% of Spanish speaking students will be moved to another school? Did I get that correct?
Yes, because if we look at the schools that are gonna be closed, are the schools that have the biggest Spanish population, the Latino population.
Got it.
All were Anderson, Green, Windom, Emerson. And we can talk later about how this is going to impact the bilingual education, the Spanish bilingual education. And we are completely ignored in this plan. We are not even in the numbers. They don't even know how many Latino students are going to need to move to another school.
And that, it sounds like that comes back to what we talked about at the beginning, the just not even being provided the information of what's going to happen moving forward with the CDD. And Nikema, you illustrated this at the beginning with not understanding the astronomical price. Well, you said you might understand the astronomical price and what's going to happen with it moving forward. I'm curious to understand what do you believe that the Minneapolis Public Schools is believing that will all benefit from the CDD? I mean, obviously they wouldn't do this if they didn't think it was going to have some benefit or payoff. What do you think the main the reason is for them offering the CDD?
Well, I would say that the reality is that Minneapolis Public Schools is selling the CDD to the community as an equity plan, a plan that will close the so-called achievement gaps, which I call opportunity gaps in public education that exists within Minneapolis Public Schools. We know that students of color, and I'm talking specifically about African-American students, Latinx students, Asian students, as well as our American Indian students, consistently have lower performance outcomes on standardized tests, reading scores, math scores, et cetera, than their white peers, along with graduation rates as well. There are significant gaps that have been alarming for so many years. We have been crying out for the district to make changes for many, many years. And rather than working collaboratively with the people in the community, the district leaders go behind closed doors and hatch this plan called the CDD. And they're basically trying to force this plan down the throats of Minneapolis residents, and particularly parents who have children within Minneapolis Public Schools. That is not how you focus on equity. A focus on equity starts with the people. We live in a very diverse city that's 40% people of color. So if the district was genuinely concerned about equity, they would have ensured that they included the people to hear exactly how we think that the school district should address the opportunity gaps in education, but they didn't do that. They devised this particular plan, how we think that the school district should address the opportunity gaps in education. Someone has their, hello?
So we had a little overlap there. Go on, sorry.
Oh, okay, sorry about that. So I was just going to say that that the district went on its own and came up with this plan, and they're trying to force us to buy into it by telling us that this is going to close the gaps in education. But when you look at the plan, the ways in which you close the gaps in education are peripheral to the plan. The focus, in my opinion, was really on trying to shave millions of dollars in transportation costs and using that as the real basis for why they're moving forward with this plan. Not to mention the reality that so many parents of color did not feel that they had a voice within Minneapolis Public Schools. And so they got tired of going to school board meetings, tired of arguing with the school district. And so guess what they did? They voted with their feet. And many parents removed their children from Minneapolis Public Schools and they placed their children in surrounding suburban schools or in charter schools. Not to mention through open enrollment, many parents would, send their child from one part of the district to the next in search of a higher quality of education. And that has resulted in some schools having lower enrollment than others. The other thing that has happened is because the district has not really ever focused on equity in a genuine way, they have concentrated resources in certain parts of the city, particularly in Southwest Minneapolis, which has caused a huge divide between Southwest Minneapolis and and parents across all parts of the city that are much more diverse. And the district is now claiming that by moving magnet schools over, by shifting K through 8 programs to K through 5, by changing IB programs, that somehow they will be able to level the playing field. However, what they are doing is actually disruptive. It is not going to address the underlying inequities that we're talking about. Another of which includes the lack of diversity amongst teachers. Again, that's a peripheral part of the plan that's not central to what they're trying to do. We also know that having high quality teachers are important. And while some schools have teachers that are effective teachers, that have great credentials, the reality is that schools in North Minneapolis are more likely to have less experienced teachers and teachers with lower credentials than in Southwest Minneapolis. And so all of those inequities have led us to this place. And rather than listening to the community, the district has decided to, again, hatch this plan, sell it as an equity plan, which has caused a lot of division, and a lot of division that was already there to come to the surface. And you know who loses in the end? Our children. And we're just here saying we're not going to stand for it. We want equity in the district, but we want them to do it the right way. They have not had a full equity assessment or audit of this plan. That is a part of what the district is supposed to be doing on this plan. They have not done that. So that's one of our demands as well, to make sure that this plan is going to do what they say that it will do. And primarily, one of the things that they're claiming that it's going to do is integrate our schools, right? And so from my perspective, that means that they feel that if there's a certain percentage of white kids in the class, certain percentage of Black kids, Latinx kids, Somali kids in the class, that's automatically going to close the gaps in education. That makes no sense whatsoever. If you're not dealing with outdated and racist curriculum, you're not dealing with the digital divide that exists within many of our schools, you're not dealing with some of the language performance issues that could be corrected by ensuring high quality programming, addressing issues that special education students are facing as well. I mean, the list goes on and on of the underlying problems within Minneapolis Public Schools that are not being addressed through this plan. Moving people around, moving children around into different buildings and shuffling around programs is not going to close these gaps.
Okay, and I want to touch on several things that you brought up and just get to them specifically in each lane. And to start with that, Zeinab, if you want to unmute really quick, you brought up a point that I want to expand on. You said Somali families didn't hear about the changes until right before the epidemic / pandemic.
That's correct.
I'm curious, what did that mean to you, and why do you think it took that long to get the word out or the communication to Somali families?
See, with the Somali families, the second language is obviously one of the main advantage that the district is taking from them, from my understanding. These families are struggling on their own, and with the double jobs, like they have 2-3 jobs, they don't have the means, the times to be at school all the time, to dig information, especially with the complex information. I try to read the CDD, and it's very complex, and it just kind of feels like it's just reshoveling things that don't make sense at all. And with the language piece of it, that's added to it. So it made it more challenging for them to, and because the district did not hire a specific group of people, at least to explain, to give them sense of understanding what they are getting into it. They're hearing gossip, they're coming to my office in the classroom. Hey, Zeinab, we heard this is going to be K to 8, K to 5 instead of K to 8.
Yeah.
But there's a whole lot of piece that goes in there that they don't understand. They had no clue. Maybe a week or 2 weeks before the pandemic, a few families came to me and said, so does that mean next year I can't bring my children here because they're going to be in the 6th grade, or, Omar is going to be 6, Muhammad is going to be 7. Does that mean we can't come here? We've worked so hard to get into the school. What's happening? We don't understand. Please explain it to me. I was overwhelmed with questions from the parents that are extremely frustrated that I remember one mom cried and said, I wish I spoke this language. She said, Zeinab, I wish I spoke English. I would have gone to the district myself and talked to them and understand what this whole thing is about, or I would have spoken to the teachers or the administration at Barton, but I don't speak English. I'm limited. I have 3 jobs. I have 8 kids at Barton. I don't have time to do this. So I feel like this is taking a whole lot of advantage. 42% of the Barton students happen to be Somali speaking families. They're coming from, wow. That's almost half of the student population at Barton, and not to extend that group of people to let them know, hey, your children will be going elsewhere. That part really hurts. And I think the parents are very frustrated. They felt like they are no factor in this whole CDD. They have no voice. They believe that they're non-existent actually, to them. So with the Somali families, it's because they come under African American. They also come under language. So they have 2 factors that are playing in this. That's one of the reasons as to why they're not accepted. They're minorities within minorities. That's how they feel it.
Yeah.
So it's very challenging, and it's very saddened to actually find out the last minute. And it's one of the things that are challenging with the families.
Well, you clearly can't. I mean, nobody can speak for every family, but I'm saying I want to know from your perspective and your experience, when you say 42% of Barton is Somali speaking, yes? My question is.
That's what I heard. Yes.
Okay. My question is. Is there an air or a feeling of being a second-class citizen, or some type of condescension, or what is the general feeling that you get when you speak to these families and they say, "Oh, I was last to know," or "Oh, this information was withheld"? What is the general feeling that you've kind of experienced when families come to you?
Absolutely, they feel second-class citizen. Number one, they actually feel that. And also they feel like they are being punished for not knowing the English language. I feel that's one of the understanding that I'm receiving from the families. They're saying that we are being punished because I cannot speak language. I am being punished because I have 2 jobs and I cannot come to the meetings that Barton are hosting it by the CDD. I have young kids at home. I don't have a babysitter. I cannot come to this meeting.
Yeah.
I'm a single mom of 5. I cannot come to this meeting. You don't have interpretation services for sure. You don't have childcare for me to even come if you say this CDD. So it's a lot of questions that come in. So second-class citizen is absolutely one of the vibe that I received from the Somali parents at Barton Elementary.
Okay, and that's interesting to know, because I did hear about a parent-teacher conference, a parent conference where. On the north side in a specific school where not everybody spoke English. And so instead of, getting somebody to translate for each group of people that spoke a different language, they separated everybody and put different people into different rooms and then had a translator speak to them there. And just the kind of, if you can imagine the feeling or the look to say, okay, you got to get out of this room. We have to put you in a different room so we can speak to you. That in and of itself, it takes on a physical condescension that I think is very negligent on the end of Minneapolis Public Schools and how they're handling it. Michael Dueñas, I'm going to get to you and ask you, because Zeinab, you spoke about this, but Michael, K-8 schools are expanding nationally, yet the CDD plans to close or change the majority of K-8s, lowering the total of K-8s in the district from 11 to 2, and sending middle schoolers to large standalone middle schools. How is this going to affect Minneapolis? And then after that, I just want to put a segue into that to get back to the transportation budget suddenly changing that you mentioned earlier. But first and foremost, how will this K-8 slashing K-8 schools to just middle schools? What is that? How will that affect Minneapolis?
Well, I think Zeinab really summed it up well about we have families who choose a district that a school that's K through 8 so that they can get as many children as possible into the school, be able to have access to the same teachers, the same support staff, the same principal and vice principals. You develop a relationship over time with that, and that helps you feel more secure in your child's education, and it helps the children feel more of a connection to the school and the families. One of the things we know that helps, and why we see more K-8 springing up across the country, is it helps with retention efforts of families in the district and of students, because those students have a continual relationship beyond just K-5. And if we look at the history of the district and the numbers right now, the time period when we lose the most students in Minneapolis to we don't even know where, to be truthful, is the transition from 5th grade out of K-5 into a middle school. We lose by far the most students there than any other time period in K-12 education. K-8s are designed to help alleviate that problem. And by seeing a loss of these K-8 schools, we're going to see, one, parents having to choose, well, do I go to my child's elementary school? Do I go to my child's middle school? Putting more stress on them, more stress on the family unit as they try to figure out, how do I navigate education, especially if they're first generation college, high school graduates, let alone going on to college. It's like that's how you build community knowledge, family knowledge, that then ripples across not just that family, but the entire community, to really begin to lift everyone else up in education. And we're going to see the destruction of that. And a prime example of how is the district not listening to us, the constituents who have families in the district who have gone through it. In North, we had a bunch of families come together with teachers and say, we want a K-8, and this is why we want a K-8. And they had a long list of things that they said would help them ensure the better education of their children. And we don't see any of that in the district CDD proposal, which is extremely problematic, because those families put a lot of effort into that, along with the school employees. And they came up with ideas that we know work, not just there, but across the country. How do you get students engaged in school to stay in school? How do you help empower teachers to teach other population groups that they're not as familiar with? How do you help bring in support staff to get the child to feel like they have someone they can talk to in the school and that they want to wake up and go see in the morning?
And really quick, Michael, before I jump to a question that Nikema has, I want to ask you, why do you believe the Minneapolis Public School Board believes that slashing a K through 8 to maybe a K through 5 is going to benefit students?
They haven't proven any reason why. And that's what's really disturbing. The proof should be on them, on the district, on the administration to show us this is going to work and this is why. And they haven't done that. And that's really insulting. It's very insulting to the people who live in the district.
Yeah, to kind of throw it out there and say, hey, it's going to work. How? We don't know. It's just going to work. And that again speaks to the beginning of not the misunderstanding, but I would say the lack of information, or the cloud I think everybody's experiencing. This is being provided and saying that it's going to help people. And if the community says, well, how? And there's no answer, that, as you said, it sounds very insulting. Nikema, speaking to special ed and K through 8, what is the correlation of K through 8 affecting special ed, and then slashing K through 8 to a K through 5? What does that mean to special ed students?
So just to piggyback off of some of the issues that Michael brought up, a lot of times in these discussions, if we don't have a child who is personally impacted by special education, those students get left behind. They're invisible within this conversation. And a mother of a child in special education within Minneapolis Public Schools sent a message through my website after she saw, our activism around these issues. And she basically shared her story. And she talked about the fact that she has a child, I believe, with autism, who has had a very difficult time with some behavioral issues at his current school. His school is a K through 8 school. He has spent, she and the staff have spent a lot of time trying to get her son on track, trying to get him comfortable in the environment and around his teachers, and establish a solid routine for him to be successful. And now she's concerned that that will all be thrown out the window if he has to leave that school by the 5th grade. And that's something that people aren't really thinking about, that the district is not thinking about, how disruptive this is going to be to some of our most vulnerable children.
Yeah.
It's like the children are just an afterthought. Financial considerations, I think, are number one. What is happening to our children don't matter. And it's just, I'm sure that there's so many parents who are watching this who can relate to that. And particularly those parents who have children with special needs that they feel are being overlooked in this plan. The district was already doing a disservice to too many children who receive special education services. And I fear that this will only exacerbate the situation.
And speaking of vulnerable students, Francisco, I want to go to what you were speaking about in the beginning when you said that this is going to affect people that have 3 jobs, are dealing with an epidemic, can't really take a break. And when we talk about, a lot of students dealing with, a life or several lives outside of school, we talk about people that are under the thumb of stratification, students of color, people that are in low income situations, been historically neglected or have basically been on, the short end of white supremacy throughout our country. My question to you is, how can the CDD, why is it important to delay the vote of the CDD? And then furthermore, how can the CDD recognize the vulnerable people that we're speaking of that it's impacting?
Sure, I'll do my best to answer that question. The process, as has been presented to us, has been defined as North Minneapolis and South Minneapolis. And we understand that we live in a society that is so highly segregated. So we totally understand that. Mm-hmm. But in this equation, North and South Minneapolis, they forget, so we need to reframe that narrative, because South Minneapolis and South Central Minneapolis, there is a large mix communities of Latinos, Somalis, and Black African Americans. Mm-hmm. So, but then in the equation North and South, the idea of bringing resources to North Minneapolis, which is totally important, and then obviously we believe in equity, it's important that happens. But when they create that binary process, they forget about South Central Minneapolis, where we reside. Most of, like 80% of the Latinos resides in South Central, for instance. Yeah. So with that in mind, when the district goes and rethink how the schools are going to be recreated, and as Nekima said, they are mostly thinking about seats, schools, and mm-hmm. are left out. So, and those students that we're talking about are kids, have created communities. So we have a range of different communities, either by language, by culture, and those communities are being disrupted in this process. And this disruption has created a lot of commotion in our communities. If you're an immigrant, the first thing that you want is you go and find a place where you can settle in, and you want to figure out how you are going to navigate. And then you bring your child to a school system where you want this kid to have a level of certainty, of security. But mm-hmm. all these conversations happen without no answers, but as ideas. And they begin shifting school kids, created a bunch of disruption to those families and fear. And so right now, when we have a federal government that is so irresponsible when it relates to immigrants, and especially Latino immigrants or Muslims as well, when we have that system so unstable because the federal government is acting that way, and then we have our educational system, which is, I was hoping that the educational system is the most stable system so our families can function. But when they begin doing all these moves without having a level process that would allow families to feel certain about what's going on, that creates more commotion. And for instance, when I have talked to some of the, when I have looked at the process, I mean, if you look at the documents of the Minneapolis Public School about the vision and all the things, I mean, it's lovely in the way that they think they would like to achieve that, or in a way that they want to see that happening, but it's the process itself. In the process and the way that it's been happening is not going to allow to arrive where they think they will arrive. And so what we have been asking here is, wait a second, let's rethink the process. Make sure that the various communities that we have in place are not disrupted because we don't have a solid plan that will allow us to move into something better. And making sure that many of the people who have not been yet, haven't been yet engaged, get engaged. And let's think about not Minneapolis in this duality of North and South. Let's think about our communities, our children, and let's think about creating a vision for a system that will allow, that is going to allow us to move or create a 21st century educational system that integrates our various communities, where language is not just a second class that you take. Language is culture, and language is an essential component of this process. So, I mean, so it is key for us that the processes we re-engage, that we stop now because we're in the middle of a crisis, and that our families are at the center of this process. And
to speak to that is a great point that you bring up, because I've looked at the website and the wording is very it has an allure to it, and it has a it's worded greatly. However, the process, I think, as we move with this discussion, that's the core of what we're getting at here. And what is that process? And is there any wording that illustrates that process? And before we really get to that, Silvia, I want to ask you, and this is, I know that this is a blunt question, but I'm curious to know, why do you believe that Latino students have been left out of the numbers in this wording? And going forward, how would you want Latinx students to be included in the wording? Oh, Silvia, you're on mute. You want to unmute real quick? Yeah.
Well, and I feel like the same that Zeinab said, that the Latinos are like a second-class citizens in all this. I can talk about my own experience trying to go to the board meetings and talk. So English is my second language, and I can express myself much better in Spanish and be there trying to talk, and they don't even have translation for me. So we are being like excluded. We don't have a voice, and we are really impacted. So I want to talk a little about the bilingual education. And so today we have 8 schools. 5 schools are one way, so that means that it's only Latino students. They eliminate these programs and are gonna combine it with the immersion program. The CDD combined 8 schools into 3.
Okay.
So a lot of Latino kids need to move around. Also, what Francisco said, that is not just North and South. In 75–80% of Latino families are in South Minneapolis. But with the CDD plan, 44% of the seats for dual immersion program are in Northeast, in Sheridan, where 10% of the Latinos live at Northeast. So it doesn't make any sense. And the other thing is that they are destroying our communities, because what also Francisco said, like the Latino kids, the families that are in Green Central or at Windom or Anderson, Falwell, they found a place. They are happy where they are, and now they need to move, and the families don't even know that they need to move. And now they are worried about how they're gonna feed their kid. And they need to think about moving now to another school. For me, is unethical. I don't feel like the district should be doing this to our families. The other problem with bilingual education is that they said that we will have only immersion program at Jefferson, and was the only positive feedback that I heard about the CDD. And now with the new plan number 6, they said that the middle school is gonna be a strand on Anderson. That means it's like having 2 schools in 1 school. And even Eric Moore said that they don't want a strand program because it's more expensive and they don't work very well. And that is one example of how they are not listening to the Latino families, because it was the only positive thing that we saw. And now we are not gonna have a Jefferson as a middle school, and we are gonna have Anderson that is gonna be huge. It's gonna be with 1,538 students for a middle school.
Wow.
Would you like to send your kid there?
That's bigger than high schools.
It's like a high school for middle school kids. I don't want to send my daughter there. Excuse me, but that's, and tell me about social and emotional learning in a middle school that is 1,500 students. So how I feel like immigrant and Latino, I feel like they don't care about me. They can say in the paper that they welcome immigrants, but I don't feel it.
So what can the Minneapolis Public School Board do to, and here's the deal. I understand that it's problematic in asking this question because it puts the burden and the onus on you. And I'm just trying to get to ideas and understandings of your personal experience. From your personal experience, how could the CDD serve the Latinx community better, if at all?
Our language is our culture. So for me, it's very important the Spanish immersion program, because it's the way that I'm gonna transmit the culture to my kids, to my students or my daughters. I need to be able to talk to them in my language. And they are not doing a good job with the bilingual education. They are reducing the seat. The Latino kids are gonna need to move to Northeast, even if they live in South Minneapolis. And so I want the CDD. I know that we need a change. For sure, we need a change, and we do need to do MPS better. But we want to be part of the process. We want to co-create. We want to be part of the creation. We want to listen to the families and the students. The teachers are gonna need to do the job, and they are not part of this. How this is gonna be successful if the teachers are not in the table? So we want to be part of this.
And so saying that the teachers have to be a part of this, and including the voices, I want to get to one of an audience member's question, which is, I think it's a question that everybody is thinking that's watching this and listening, and just raise your hand if you'd like to, anybody who'd like to take this on. The question is, what can people do? They have contacted the board, petitions, etc., and it seems like the board has made up their mind. Now, I know that working in the definitive is tough, and sometimes we think that it's just a wrap before we get there, but what can we do right now? Does anybody want to speak to that right off the bat? Nikema?
Oh, Michael, it looked like you were going to say
something.
Oh,
Michael, go ahead.
Please, Nikema.
Okay, I was just going to say that I know that a lot of folks have been calling their school board members. I would say keep calling until they get tired of you, and then call some more.
Yeah.
Right. It's not the time to give up. It's the time to continue to send emails to them and continue to mobilize your network so that it's not just you, but you have 10 other people who you know, family members, friends, etc., who are also making the calls and also sending the emails. You can also write op-ed letters to the Star Tribune. You can reach out to Minnesota Public Radio and ask them to cover this more heavily and more seriously, so that the voices of parents and community members are being heard, and particularly the voices of people of color who have a lot of concerns about what's happening and who are disproportionately being left behind through this plan. We also have some other actions that we are planning as hashtag our MPS. As you guys can see, we're a multicultural group, multiracial group of folks from different walks of life. And we invite other folks to join us. We represent various organizations, but when we have actions and we do calls to action, get involved. Some of them will do our best to practice social distancing, but we want people to get involved and to be more vigilant as May 12th comes up. It's coming up really quickly. It's not too late to change the minds of school board members, and hopefully them listening to this conversation and hearing the nuances of our concerns from different voices will have an impact on those school board members who are on the fence or who need to do some soul searching and realize that they don't know enough about this plan to jeopardize the entire future of Minneapolis Public Schools.
And Michael, do you want to say anything or add anything to that as well? Because I do have a follow-up question for you too, Michael.
I think part of it also is for us to just really voice where we feel about this. I mean, we all want to see something happen, but I've been around long enough and I've been promised 10,000 things that would help me and my community or students of color. And at the end of the day, if there was no budget, if there was no one assigned to actually work on it, it never happened. And I just see a lot of smoke and mirrors with the CDD. Nothing's given a price tag. Nothing is financed. No personnel are being rearranged according to the CDD. There's no baseline financial information. It's like demand of financial accountability, a true accountability from an outside auditor. Demand, we have to have an equity and diversity impact assessment, and that hasn't been done on this current plan or even the one just before it. And those are things that are actually policy procedures that have to be followed, and we're not getting it.
And so, in speaking to that with the budget and whatnot, you mentioned earlier that the transportation budget suddenly changed.
Yeah, it suddenly changed. It's and I only knew about this because me and a few other people are going in and like, well, where are the numbers to explain what they're doing? What's the cost? And and we had they posted a figure for the cost for transportation, but it's an empty figure. It's hanging out there by a thread. We don't know what it's based on with how the material has been given to us. No way to verify it. And then suddenly that figure changed, increased by another $10 million, literally overnight in a new slide presentation that was put up by the board, by the school district, excuse me. But that is extremely problematic. What suddenly changed? And that figure wasn't for next year. It was for this year when we have school buses doing less work. So why is the cost increasing? What happened? No explanation for it.
Yeah, well, Nikema mentioned this earlier, that some of the wording said it was going to shave millions of dollars in transportation costs. And correct me if I'm wrong in saying that. Was that correct?
That's one of the things we've been told through the CDD, that it would do that.
Okay, and so if that's one of the benefits, then why do you think that it would change so extremely from whatever it was to $10 million more?
That's the big unknown. I mean, that's just one of the many like huge financial questions that caused me to doubt the ability of a grass administration to actually do the work, because that is so basic. I've sat on boards. I'm currently on a board. We would never accept the financials that the district is putting out. We would never accept it because, one, we would be sued potentially if something happened. The school board is currently protected from that, I hear, but I'm not sure about that. But that's a very, very fundamental question for how do you create a program that's going to survive and thrive? And all that I see is budgetary numbers that
don't add up.
Someone just made up, as far as I'm concerned, and any auditor would say that too.
It does. I mean, and as a moderator, I'm supposed to be neutral here. And $10 million in a jump, I want to know, without me adding my own, opinion to that, is $10 million in what they're offering, is that a large jump in contextually in what the budget that they're
It's almost a 30% jump.
Wow, okay. So this is for everybody. The Minneapolis Public School Board resolution states that the CDD must protect and this is the wording that it says, protect our immigrant students, families, and staff. And I think we kind of have the idea. I know the question is, do you feel that the CDD will do this? And I think we've kind of already aired that out. The core issue I want to jump right into is, and it says protect our immigrant students, families, and staff. I want to kind of flip this question and say, do you feel that the CDD benefits white students and families most? If so, why? If not, why? I just want to jump into that because we have been speaking a lot about bilingual, Latinx, Muslim, Somali, all these identities that a demographic that is highly non-white. And I do want to speak to kind of just, the elephant in the room, which is, white students. Do you feel that the CDD is benefiting white students more than everybody else? And if so, why? If not, why? Does anybody want to take that on first, please? If at all. Francisco, if you want to unmute real quick, please.
Let me see if I can respond to your question here. Like I mentioned before, I am a father of 3 kids. 2 of my kids already graduated from high school. When my kids were younger and had a job where I was making back then like $6.50 or $7 an hour, I had to work so many hours and so many jobs to be able to support my family. So when we look at this educational system, and we as Latino parents or other immigrant parents or poor people, our mind is into earning to be able to support the family. And so there are many inequities in the society we live in. I mean, access to healthcare, for instance, wages, rent, or the conditions where we live. So now, when my youngest one is in school, I am in a different financial position. And to the point where hundreds of books are in our house, computers, and all of that. So wealth impact how outcomes our kids. So when we look at for instance, there was a mom who lives in Phillips who drive her child to one school in South Minneapolis, and I asked, well, why don't you go to your local school here and you go to Windom in this case? And she said, well, I just want a good school for my child. And what is a good school? And so when you look at what a parent wants to do to ensure that the kid gets good education, there are a couple of things that we need to think about. Number one, what do we need to do to ensure that we do good investments in the schools that are in our communities? And so that our schools have what they need, the infrastructure has what it needs for our parents to go to the local school. Number two, what is it that we're doing so our kids, and what more investments can we do in our kids so they can succeed? So for instance, and this is, I think it's an important aspect to take. So there is no data yet, and I know that I will have some reactions here. There is no data yet. If I put my brown child in a white, in a school that is a wealthy white school, my child may do better, but it's not going to be performing equally to the white students. So it will perform better than the school that is less funded or is so segregated, but it's not going to perform at the same level. At the end of high school, my child may do better, but not as white kids. So that's an important question that I think we need to ask ourselves. What is going on with our kids, or what more investments do we need to do in our kids to be able, and like I said, wealth impact the outcome of our children.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's also, I think we'd be remiss to not mention that Minnesota has some of the highest, if not the highest, racial disparity in education in the country. And so I just want to put that out there as a understanding. If anybody wants to correct me or throw a better understanding of that at me, please do. And I understand what you're saying, Francisco, in that we have to take into account the entire spectrum of wealth and transportation and everything that goes into students of color kind of being on the short end or the other side of the benefit that may be going towards white students. I want to get to a question that an audience member is asking, and if anybody can answer this, what is the mayor's involvement in the CDD?
Well,
if anything at all.
I ran for mayor, so I can tell you that the mayor
has
no real involvement in the public education system. He may have some influence if he would like to use it. It's, people can try calling him and seeing if he will use his influence. But outside of that, he doesn't have any real legal authority as far as the school board is concerned.
Well, the last big thing I saw him posting about was the soon-to-be destructed Kmart. That will have a street going through it or whatever's going to happen to it. If he's able to reference something like the Kmart being taken down and whatever thoroughfare is going to be thrown across it, he surely could throw some influence towards the way of the CDD, correct?
He could if education was a real priority for him. I think, no offense to Mayor Frye, but education has not been one of his areas of focus. We saw that during the debates back in 2017. I would love for the mayor to get more involved and to gain a deeper understanding of what's happening within our public education system and engage families and community members about these issues, and then use his influence. Even if he doesn't have direct influence with some of the school board members, he may have influence with some members of the business community, right? Or other folks who could help apply pressure to school board members for them to reconsider rushing this plan through. But that's really the scope of what he can do right now. He doesn't have any, like I said, legal authority regarding the CDD.
And also, Nikema, can you speak to the Cruz Guzman case? And somebody asked, won't the CDD plan help us avoid that lawsuit? Question mark.
Well, the short answer is no, because the lawsuit has already going on. Cruz Guzman has been going on for over 4 years. I think it started in 2015.
Wow.
I joined the case in January of 2019 as co-counsel on behalf of 3 charter school interveners. So that case has 3 sides. It's the folks who filed the lawsuit, who filed that suit on behalf of a small number of parents of color. It became a class action lawsuit, and it was filed against the state, so the Department of Education, the legislature, et cetera. And then, we saw that, my co-counsel saw that charter schools could potentially be impacted by the outcome of Cruz Guzman, and so they intervened in the case on behalf of 3 charter schools that primarily serve students of color. And one of our clients actually serves kids who have been, kicked out or transferred from traditional public school settings. And so, in my involvement, in the lawsuit, I've, had an opportunity to see what's going on from the inside. And we're right now in the midst of mediation. We've been in mediation for almost a year now, trying to settle this case. So the reality is that I'm sure that, it's possible, I cannot say with 100% certainty, but it's very possible that the administration of Minneapolis Public Schools thought that making these drastic changes was going to help them avoid any potential negative outcomes of Cruz Guzman. But as someone who is involved in the litigation, I honestly believe that they're acting very presumptively in terms of making these changes and not including community in the process, and possibly making things worse. We've already faced significant declining enrollment within Minneapolis Public Schools, which means that we always have a budget shortfall, year after year, huge deficits that have happened in the past. And if parents become so upset about this plan, if it is implemented, it is possible that they could withdraw their children from Minneapolis Public Schools in droves. That would be a huge loss to Minneapolis Public Schools, right? And I am a parent. I live in North Minneapolis. My children range in age from 2 all the way to 22. And my children have attended traditional public schools, charter schools, private schools, parochial schools, all in search of the best education. And I know that the majority of children, particularly children of color, are going to attend Minneapolis Public Schools. Mm-hmm. So no matter what other options crop up, that's where our kids are going to go. And so we need to preserve Minneapolis Public Schools as best we can and strengthen it so that mm-hmm. all of our incredible populations of students are being served. Right now, the way that we even talk about students, we have white students in some ways on a pedestal, as white students who don't have disabilities. And then we have students of color all lumped in together as if we're a monolith, when the reality is that there is so much diversity within the context of students of color. When you look at all of the different racial and ethnic groups that are actually represented and that are actually being underserved, and who can go to school on a given day and not see a teacher who looks like them. That is a problem. Yeah. Yep. And so I think that the district is making a huge mistake if they are making these changes in response to the Cruz Guzman litigation. And that's about as much as I can say right now, but I just don't think that what they're doing there's any real justification for it.
Do you think they would ever go on record and say that they're actually doing the CDD explicitly to undo what happened with Cruz Guzman?
I'm not sure if they'll be honest about that, but it wouldn't completely surprise me if that is a part of the reason, especially because Cruz Guzman, the original lawsuit, focused very heavily on the push for integration, right? Mm-hmm. And so schools that have a high concentration of students of color and students who receive free and reduced lunch are considered to be in segregated learning environments. So part of my role, at least I took it upon myself to make this my role because of my background in racial justice and equity. It was to try to help redefine what a segregated school actually is, and to make sure that we're not just saying because the school is 70% students of color that there's no chance that kids can be successful. That's absolutely ridiculous. Mm-hmm. Within the context of a school that has a high concentration of Black, Latinx, Somali, Native American among students, they're diverse. They're not necessarily segregated within the meaning of segregation during the time of Brown versus the Board of Education, right? Where separate is unequal. And that's kind of the path that the lawsuit was taking. But I think that's very flawed in terms of that analysis. And I believe Minneapolis Public Schools has somewhat adopted that same mindset.
Okay, and Michael, real quickly before I get to Silvia and Zeinab on just going forward with this, Michael, quickly, are all the numbers public on this, and is the budget public? Like, can people go somewhere to see these numbers that the CDD is providing?
So
is working with
until this weekend. The only numbers that had been released on it was one slide that had very, very limited information. It had some numbers that they claimed were current expenses and revenue, which looks suspicious. Those were publicly available on one slide buried within the broader CDD plan that's on the school district website. Now,
and what does that communicate to you? I'm curious. What does that communicate to you?
It raises huge red flags. It's one is there something else going on that they're trying to cover? I mean, that's at the very forefront. That's the immediate question. Two, is it just they're not paying attention to it, which means they're incompetent, which is just as bad. And three, it's like, what is there another agenda going on behind everything? Those are all fairly common perspectives when the numbers aren't anchored in anything about what's going on. They're all three bad. They've had more than enough time to roll out better financials on this. They don't even do a revenue projection beyond 1 to 5 years. And then the new public numbers that they've just released on the costing of the CDD plan, that's now up on the website. I think it's been up less than a week now, that for the district's website. All of a sudden we have $117 million more for bonding, for capital costs. And that wasn't there before. And that's really raises another huge issue, because all of a sudden that pushes the school district where their revenue to debt ratio goes into the danger zone, where there has to be outside observation about what's going on. And that's predicted to happen in 5 years. Why did this just suddenly get added? Where's this new revenue where's the new capital funds going to come from that weren't there before? It's going to cause property taxes to increase also, which is also another huge concern. But the fact that these numbers are all changing and there's not one consistent about these are the, just to sort of think of it as, this is the money we have now, and this is why we have the money we have now. This is what things cost us. This is what the money we make. That basic information isn't there.
And that does. I'm trying to think of the word that you used in the beginning of not having the numbers there, and it for me, it sounds like it produces a cloud for everybody if they don't understand where the money's going, and if $117 million appeared out of nowhere. And now that we have COVID, which we're going to get to in a little bit, and I want to speak to Francisco and Nikima about that later. What happens to the budget if we're dealing with the pandemic right now? But to get to Silvia, as I promised earlier, you spoke about getting teachers involved, getting the Latinx community involved. My question to you is, and to you and Zeinab, what would a truly authentic community engaged process look like to build a CDD that is responsive to the input and needs of the community? What does a Minneapolis Public School Board look like that is accountable, that holds themselves accountable to your community? What does that look like?
Well, I think for the Latinx community, we don't have any board member that represent us.
How does that make you feel to not have any board members in the Minneapolis Public School Board that represents your community? How does that make you feel?
Bad, sad, invisible. I really believe that we are bearing the worst burden in the plan, and they don't even say our name there. And so my dream will be that the Latino voices are here in Minneapolis. We want to build a different process. It's a different process with parents, educators, and students co-creating a plan. I want to dream. I want to dream about the school that I want for my kid. Mm-hmm. And it is not enough. I want I want the chance to dream with parents, with educators, with the community, with the diversity.
Well, here's an obvious thing that we're pointing out. The comprehensive district design, obviously, it doesn't include any numbers of Latinx students, and yet there is no Latinx people on the Minneapolis Public School Board. And so where there's lack of representation, there's lack of inclusion. So obviously you'd want to see somebody on the board. What else going forward? Would there be, would everybody hear about this in Spanish at the same time as English, or what's been your experience, and how could it change? How would you want to see it changed?
Yeah, well, I feel like the Latino community doesn't know about the Model 6 because this was the last model that they presented was after the pandemic.
What's the Model 6, if you can, speak to everybody that's listening right now?
Yeah, so if you think in like the undocumented families, They are struggling so much now with the COVID. They don't even have like access to technology. So they don't know about this. And even before, like when you printed the information in Spanish, was different than the information in English. It was not the same information.
Okay.
So I'm very worried about my community.
And also what's being communicated to your community, it sounds like as well. And Zeinab, I want you to jump in on this because you spoke to this earlier and said that the Somali community, correct me if I'm wrong, the CDD came out in Somali right before the epidemic, so people didn't hear about it right until the epidemic, correct?
Yeah, the very close to the epidemic. That's when most of the Somali families have heard about this CDD change.
Why did it take so long, do you think? Or what was the issue with that?
Well, the number one issue is they did translated the document CDD to a Somali that was available. However, there was a lack of communication. No one communicated these families that these CD are available. And having said that, also most of the families, especially the ones that I've dealt with, that I'm knowledgeable of, are coming from a oral tradition background, which means a lot of them can't read the Somali language, being a new, very new language in its own, can't read, can't write, and that added up to it too. So with the Latino community, at least they're able to read it, I believe. I could be wrong for that, but with the Somali family, even I, being a Somali speaking parents, when I looked at the CDD in the Somali language, I was blown away. It did not make sense to me because these are fairly a new vocabularies that they use that did not exist back in the Somali education system. So you can't even translate. There's no word that would say, comprehensive district design. You have to say the same word. You can't, there's no translation for that.
So let me get this straight, Zeinab. So you speak Somali and you read Somali, yet what was given to you, written in Somali for the CDD, to
give it to the Somali family. That was initially what I was giving it, that part. I was able to read the English version before I got the Somali, but once we had the meeting at Barton Elementary, where I organized the Somali parents to come in and hear us, that's when I was giving these documents. But when I looked at it, I could not translate. It was that language was not something I was available.
The same in Spanish.
Okay.
I started to read the first paragraph in Spanish and I had to change to English because
see, with the translation piece of it, it's not just the language that you are translating. You also need to translate the cultural piece of it. Language, it's not its own a language. You need the culture to actually back it up. And with the CDD agent, they didn't have that culture. There's nothing that back it up. So families actually were even more confused than before. I was like, when I looked at it, I said, no, I'm going to put it aside and just go back to the English. And then orally, from my understanding, what I understood it, give it to them. And that's how I was able to translate it to them. But however, going back to Barton Elementary being K-8 magnet school also attracts students from across the city. We have Somali parents that are driving from north, from south because of that open progressive. So they too are driven for that. That's why there's a higher number. Actually, I was told right now, it's not even 42% of Barton students are not Somali. We're looking about 51 now, which I was giving it right now.
Okay.
Could be wrong, but because that number, so you have that large population of the community in there, and Barton is one of the schools that will be affected. How come you did not reach out to them specifically and say, hey, these are people that need to know this? If they have an oral tradition, we'll hire someone. The district is full of Somali speaking, and
Okay, I was going to ask that.
They would have done it, but they didn't reach out. There was no outreach to it. Everything was left to me. I'm also a bilingual aide as well. I have with my own two children that I wanted to know myself before, I explained it to them, but it was very challenging even for me to know it. The whole zoning, the whole bus system didn't make sense. And also with the Somali families that I've learned later on, I knew it, but I've learned it more of it, is also that whole segregation of it, that separation anxiety within the families. I mean, they came for K-8. They want their kindergarten to sit in the bus with their brother and sister who is in 7th and 8th grade to help out get off the bus, because oftentimes we have minorities who we're struggling with multiple jobs. We don't have the privilege of coming picking up our child. There's no two parents, always is one parent. And because the children help each other, that was one of the things that there was really a struggle for them to actually grasp when I explain it. I think there's like, now I'm hearing from Silvia, there's 6. I thought it was only 5 change, but there's 6 of it. So because of that 5, one of them, it just talks about the K-8 shrinking to K-5 schools and middle school going separate. So you have a mom by herself, single mom with the 5 children who has, you know, students from K-8. Now she would have to drive when it comes to conferences, you know, to 3 different schools. Maybe she has in high school, and then she has a middle school, she has a kindergarten. I mean, it's overwhelming as it is when you don't have the time. There's a variance of a lot of things, but to protect the immigrant students and families and staff, when I'm looking at that question, Somali families do not feel like they're protected. As a matter of fact, they feel the only thing that they hold on to it, the district is taking it away from them, which is the Barton Elementary, the magnet school. That's all they hold on to it. That school, it means a lot to them. They've been in waiting lists for years. Some of the siblings actually have graduated by time they were able to come in to Barton School. I mean, it's a lot that process that go in before they come to Barton School. And now that they feel like, okay, now we understood, we have classes that are different grade levels. It works better if my son has, you know, difficulties in learning one grade, he has another grade to make it up. They have, you know, 1st and 2nd together, 3rd and 4th together, 7 and 8. It's wonderful the way it's designed. And that's what attracted to these families. That's why they have close to 50, maybe even above that of Somali speaking, but they don't feel like, they feel like the only thing that they actually hold on to it has been taken away. And I too feel the same thing. I have 2 children. I have a 3rd and 4th. My, you know, one more year, my son is going to be in 5th grade and then 6th. So now I would have to drive it. And I too is a single mother. I hold 2 jobs already. I work at Barton School and I work after school program. I don't have the privilege. I don't have the time to navigate 2 schools. So I was actually very happy when I came across Barton as a K-8. I applied several schools within Minneapolis Public School, and actually I took Barton because of that magnet, because of that K-8. And oftentimes families have similar issues within that. So it is a lot of equity piece that plays in it, you know, within the language, within the color, within the piece of cultural, the Muslim population. It can go on a lot.
Yeah, and Zeinab, what I love that you brought up was the emotional tax that will be incurred upon Muslim families, Spanish-speaking families, Somali-speaking families, or non-English-speaking families, or just people that will be on the brunt of the CDD. The emotional tax, I think, is something that we don't necessarily engage with because we see the literature on paper, we see, you know, 1s and 0s and A plus B equals C. And I think a large part that's been left out of it is how are students going to feel being separated from their school or have the anxiety that comes with that. Another thing I'd love to point out.
I'm sorry, I want to add one more thing. Also,
go ahead.
Historically speaking, the Somali families, when they migrated to US or other countries, oftentimes the people that actually give them those sponsors, the sponsors, like you can call it UN or UNICEF or any sponsors, oftentimes what they have a limited of number. When families line up, the sponsors will be like, okay, we have only spot of 3. We have only slot out of 5. Families can be 7 to 8. So we have then that separation of it. So I had a mother, Barton's mother, that spoke to me. She is a twin herself, and her twin were separated at the UN when they were migrating to US because the only number that they had that was available was 5. And she said, our family consisted of 8. So that had to stay behind. 3 more have to stay behind. So there's a historical impact. You know, these families are going through PTS, and it feels like this is repeating again what they've actually witnessed at their parents. And now you have the children. The parents are just like, oh my God, the only thing now my kids have is themselves, and now you're gonna just divide this. This is like a PTS back again. Oh my God, that's when my twin and I were separated at the age of 7 and the age of 8, because, and so the school is the only thing that they thought would protect it from them, because of, that whole concept of no child left behind. But however, it doesn't seem to be working that way. It actually brings it back to anxieties, different BTSs that they have gone through it again. So it's...
Yeah, and it sounds like what you're getting to, what I'm hearing is that the CDD is repeating a trauma upon people that have experienced the same trauma in the past. And another great point to get to that you and Silvia both illustrated in parallel is that what was provided for you in Spanish and Somali did not directly translate to what was provided to the communities in English. And therefore you had to go and backtrack on the language that was used and wording that was used to then repeat it back to the community. And I think what I'm hearing from that is that the Minneapolis Public School Board has failed to communicate in Spanish and Somali what they communicated in English. And my curiosity, I think if we could really get down to the roots of this, what happened in that process, and exactly where did was there a game of telephone, or how did they fail? That's one part where they failed the Spanish speaking community and the Somali speaking community. But it's also discouraging to know that they didn't supply the same wording. Francisco, you raised your hand for a little bit in the middle of Silvia speaking, and I want to get to what you wanted to say in regards of the Spanish language maybe being not thorough or clearly translated by the Minneapolis Public School Board, and what does that say to you, and how does that make you feel, I guess, and also why you raised your hand too?
Yeah, no, I think I want to reframe a couple things. I want to think that we have a number of very smart parents who cares about their kids. So I want to move a little bit away from that disempowering idea that parents are the people who don't know anything. Mm-hmm. So I want to move away from that, because I believe that parents don't know anything. Parents know a lot. And the idea that parents, in spite of being busy with life and everything else, care so much about their children and participate as much as they can in their school system. My wife is a teacher. She, when she sees parents, they show up. I show up to my kids' events when there are events. So it is key to think about that we remove a little bit move away from that deficit mind that our parents are not participating. Now, how a district engage parents and what level of success they have by engaging, that's probably something that we can think about. Mm-hmm. So the system needs to be a little bit more creative to engage parents. Mm-hmm. And one example, for instance, when the district, the multilingual department wanted to ask, in this case, Latino parents, multilingual education, the way that they did that engagement was not so well thought out. Therefore, they end up with a very small sample of parents giving an opinion about an issue that it was impacting so many other families. Mm-hmm. So to me is how equipped and knowledgeable is a system. Multiple ways of engagement, knowing that that they are working with a range of parents who are first or second generations of our English is not the first language, and so on. So, and again, as a parent, for instance, when I came to the United States and I didn't speak English, and I had to engage with the Minneapolis Public School system, I felt like, okay, how do I engage? How do I participate? Because I do deeply care about the education of my children. Now, how the system saw me probably was different. Probably they saw me with a deficit mind that I am here, this person who doesn't know anything. And in fact, I'm a teacher myself. I was trying to be a teacher. But again, our framework as parents, as we see each other, we need to see each other from that mind of asset. And we need to teach the system to see us as asset as well, that we can participate. Even if I don't speak English, I can participate and contribute, make this educational system better.
And I think that speaks to what we were talking about early on, and what would a truly authentic community engaged process look like. And it sounds like considering parents as assets, as opposed to people that you might just have to speak to or inform. I do want to get to just something that happened, and if Michael or Nakima, if you want to speak to this, the recorded school board comments, 72% of the 321 recorded calls were against the CDD, but that was before Minneapolis Public Schools families were told about the option to leave a recording. After Minneapolis Public Schools families were told, 97% of the calls were against the CDD. And do you, with this this kind of sweeping number, 97%, do you think that's going to sway the opinion or the action of Minneapolis Public Schools?
Unfortunately, I think that Minneapolis Public Schools does not agree to be accountable to our community. If they were being accountable, we wouldn't have gotten this far in terms of the CDD being proposed under these circumstances, and the fact that there's been no significant community input into its design. And we're still not being listened to. Over 3,000 people signed our petition. And yet, as of right now, they're still planning to move forward with the vote in the midst of a global pandemic. So I think that that speaks volumes about whether Minneapolis Public Schools is actually willing to listen to the people who make up the district. I think one of the other things that's important to know is that out of the calls that were played at the last school board meeting, they played about 50-50 in favor and 50-50 against. Wow. That is extremely dishonest.
So they took the 3% that were for it, and
and they flipped it, right? And some of the calls, if you listen to that meeting, were garbled. You couldn't hear what people were saying. There was also very limited participation by our Latinx and Somali community. Only a handful of calls were in Spanish, maybe 8. And then as far as our Somali community, there may have been 1. That's a problem because these families are very vocal. They're active, as Francisco was talking about, and they want their voices to be heard. And so clearly the mechanism that the district has used for gathering input is ineffective and it is inequitable. So how can the district push equity on us as far as this CDD plan when they have shown they're not practicing equity throughout the process, including in gathering information in the midst of a pandemic? I want to focus a little bit on this notion of equity. So one of the things that we've called for is an independent equity audit. We're asking for a national reputable firm to do an equity assessment of the CDD in its entirety, so that that independent firm can give us a sense of whether or not the CDD will actually accomplish what they're saying they're going to accomplish, which is greater of equity, right? Which right now is just lip service, in my opinion. And so that equity audit needs to happen. So for those families who are jumping on the bandwagon of the CDD in the name of equity, if you genuinely care about equity, please demand an equity audit. I just think that that's the least of what can happen, because all of us care about equity. We wouldn't be on this call. We wouldn't be advocating the way that we are if we didn't care about equity. But the way that the district has positioned this is it's pitted families who care about equity against other families who care about equity, and either you're for or against, when the reality is that all of us want a stronger public education system, and particularly Minneapolis Public Schools, for our children. We just have concerns about the way that the district is going about this, and the fact that their plans could significantly make matters worse, and like we said, cost a whole lot of money that we cannot afford as a community. In terms of equity, the district right now is going against its own policy. So they put something in place called the EDIA, which is the Equity and Diversity Impact Assessment, that is supposed to happen every single time a new policy is being implemented within the district that's going to have a significant impact on student learning and resource allocation. We can all agree that the CDD is going to have a significant impact on student learning and resource allocation. Mm-hmm. And yet an EDIA has only been done on the issue of student placement. I want to give a shout out to all of those folks who were part of the original EDIA committee that looked at student placement. They did as thorough a job as they could with the limited amount of time that they had. And they also articulated their concerns about whether or not the district was serious about taking their feedback into account. They did not feel completely confident in that when they actually put forward their findings, right? But people can't access their findings, and they put a lot of work into that, and that needs to be acknowledged.
Okay.
But the reality is that the focus on placement with the EDIA was one aspect of the CDD. The CDD, again, is the comprehensive district design plan, which means that there's so many areas, some of which we have discussed here tonight, that require an EDIA as well. The district has not even followed its own policy. So how could those of us who say that we care about equity sign on to something that's half-baked and that is not consistent with what the district says that it stands for, which is ensuring equity in terms of the policies that they are putting forward? And my hope is to prevent further harm from being done in the future. But we don't see that happening.
I want to get to one point that you made earlier really quickly while we have the last 18 minutes here. You did say that there's a divide. When we speak about equity in the EDIA, you mentioned a divide between Southwest Minneapolis and everyone else. What is that for people that are listening, so we can get right to the core of it? I know some of us from Minneapolis, myself, that came up through Minneapolis Public Schools, understands it, doesn't necessarily, I can't put it in words like right away, and also being a moderator, I don't think I would, but what do you mean by that when you say Southwest Minneapolis in opposition to everything else? How is the CDD, will the CDD affect Southwest Minneapolis differently than everywhere else? And if so, how?
Well, I think that the first important way to answer that is to understand that historically, a significant amount of resources have been funneled into Southwest Minneapolis, right? Okay. And we have argued about this for years. We've talked about schools in North Minneapolis and in other parts of the district being under-resourced and not having the same level of robust programming that exists within Southwest Minneapolis. And because of the attractiveness of the quality of education within many Southwest Minneapolis schools, what we saw as a result of school choice were a lot of parents, or open enrollment, a lot of parents really working hard and fighting hard to get their kids into Southwest schools, Southwest Minneapolis schools, and for good reason, right? They want the best programs that are available to them. And because the district allowed this to happen for so long, it meant that there were economic deficits, human resource deficits in terms of what is happening with experienced teachers versus less experienced teachers going into some of the most challenging parts of the district. It's left an imbalance. And so right now, Minneapolis Public Schools is claiming that the CDD will help to correct the imbalance. But again, I think that it's actually going to tip the scales in the opposite direction, and it's going to impact those students of color who right now are able to access programs outside of their home school that have been effective learning environments for them. So I can give you some of the numbers and information that I have just to kind of quantify this.
Okay.
So as I talked about before, we're lumping in students of color without really dissecting the demographics. So we're talking about African-American students, Latino students, Somali students, our Hmong and Asian students, and our Native students. The CDD will remove choices available to all communities, but in particular, those communities of color that I referenced. So the 57% of North Minneapolis elementary school students who attend a school other than their neighborhood school today will be assigned to a different school under the CDD.
Wow.
A third of the Minneapolis students who are K-8 students that attend a magnet school today, of which 62% are students of color, will be impacted under the CDD. Students in the South Central Corridor that are 79% students of color will lose neighborhood schools at Jefferson, Anderson, Sullivan, and Green. They'll lose magnet programs at Whittier, Bancroft, and Falwell. And then the families, in particular immigrant families, who lose the K-8 options, they will lose the K-8 options at Anderson, Marcy, Jefferson, Mung International, Seward, Falwell, and Barton. That's significant. This should not be rushed through in light of these disproportionate effects upon students of color. It's just unconscionable.
And so moving forward, I think a lot of people listening want to know where people can go to take further action. And we talk about COPAL, we talk about the Racial Justice Network. This forum is being recorded, so it'll go into, I think, the video section of all of all pages, Facebook pages involved, including site forums. Can anybody speak to what can people do right now to get involved and take civic engagement with the CDD?
I mean, if I speak, I think that Somali parents would like English speakers to speak for them. They want their voice to be heard. However, since they can't do themselves, they're asking and pleading for everyone else who's able to speak the language of English to speak. They're looking for allies in this problem that we're foreseeing. Anyone that is able to call their representative, they are school board members, parents that they are, that their children go to school. Last meeting I had with the Somali parents where we have no voice. Please find people that can speak for us since we don't speak the language. So I feel like there's a potential out there. A lot of people can speak and should speak, should call, petition it. Just don't let that phone stop you from it. With the epidemic, you're inside. If you're able to, please pick up the phone and call. I think that's one thing I would like people to reach out.
Okay. Anybody else? I want to just get, because I know people listening, we can say, the names of organizations and whatnot, but is there a solid number or a solid website that people can go to really get an understanding and get involved? Just to put it right out to people.
Well, one of our partners is Kids First. They have a Facebook page as well as a web page, and they're constantly putting information forward that parents can access.
And that's Kids First MPLS?
Yes.
Okay, Kids First MPLS on Facebook. Yeah. And
we can include this in the event page. We can post an update that includes the web address.
Okay. Sorry, go on, Silvia.
I think the district needs to start asking the teachers for idea, because the teachers see the kids every day. Mm-hmm. So they need to start asking the teachers. And again, please call the board members. I know that it's hard when English is your second language, but even if I feel like we can send a message in Spanish and they should do the work of trying to translate our message. Yeah, exactly. So we need to make them listen.
Yeah, and hold them. Yeah.
Community, the Latinx community, the Native American community.
Mm-hmm. And it also sounds like hashtag our MPS is something you can follow on social media, really anywhere. It's not an organization that's an expert on what's going on, but it's leading the way to an understanding of what's going on. So hashtag OURMPS, hashtag our MPS. You can find that as well. Kids First website is kidsfirstmpls.org. That's kidsfirstmpls.org. And is there a Racial Justice Network website and Facebook, Nekima, that you want to throw out here?
Yeah, folks can go to our Facebook page. They can like the page. We'll post updates as they happen. We have an Education Justice Committee as well. So if people message us and they want to be a part of the committee, which is comprised of a small number of us, but we're community members, we're teachers, we're parents, and we do our best as volunteers to try to advocate for what is in the best interest of our community. So folks are welcome to join us. Just send a message to the Facebook page for Racial Justice Network. I'm one of the people who monitors those messages, and I'll make sure that I get back to you or a member of our team. But really, all of us, I just want to make clear to folks that we're all a new group, that has formed on an ad hoc basis, and we call ourselves #RMPS, but we're comprised of a number of organizations, as you could see from the Site Forums event page, the list of groups that are co-sponsoring tonight's forum, as well as other calls to action that we plan to do right up until the vote that is supposedly scheduled to take place on May 12th, which again, we hope that other school board members who are watching, that you will hear our concerns and that you will push for a delay of the CDD, that you will push for an equity audit, that you will push for an EDIA, which is in your own policy of the CDD. That has to happen. I hate using all these acronyms, but we're in the world of education and it's full of acronyms. But all of those things are very important.
Would it also be beneficial to possibly have school board members hold a forum like this, like participate in a forum like this to actually have to answer questions as opposed to the methods that they've gone about as of lately? Michael, did you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great suggestion. I think the district has always and historically struggled with communication to parents, students, and family.
Yeah.
This is ongoing. There's a lot of discriminatory overtones to it because the call-in comment period was released officially when the district contacted families. After Passover, it started for Jewish followers of the Jewish faith. They, if they were practicing, they 48 hours before they would have gotten the message to be able to respond, because they were supposed to refrain from using electronic devices, among other things. But this, I'm reminded of when the district would do things that left out Muslim families, and that really impacted Somalis. I remember when there was a huge struggle around American Indian rights and their religion and smudging, and now we have protected programs that were mandated by the state. We can go on and on and on. Hmong, who had these longer extended funeral ceremonies that they would have to attend, that were being punished for going. So religion and discrimination and communication, they're closely tied and connected. The other thing that's really come through is the pain that so many families and our neighbors have with dealing with this pandemic. Work, food, housing, and security. They were already big issues, and they're just becoming larger. And the fact that the district is focusing on ramming through this comprehensive district design when we don't know what's going to happen, we don't know, historically when pandemics happen, families have to move. How is that going to impact neighborhoods? And so many of the immigrant refugee families know that. They've lived it already. They've done it. And so they know these big, huge, major concerns. And the fact that the district isn't focusing as much and putting all their effort into distance learning, teaching and learning, into supporting the food needs. They're doing good with the food needs, but we know more is going to have to be done, and we're going to have to continue to support that. And then the mental health of students and their families. The list goes on and on. That's where we really want to see the district focus everything right now immediately, because that's the number one concern. That's the big red fire burning in the room, and that we have to do something about. And give us time to begin to weigh in on how you actually create a program that's much more effective at helping our students of color learn.
And you bring up a good point in the pandemic, the current pandemic. So to speak to that, somebody sent a question in. We don't know what the state finances will be due to COVID-19, including lower tax base and debt due to social nets. And this plan asks our board to borrow an extra $202 negative 500 million above the loans we currently have and will cost taxpayers much more, and will ask the future school boards to go above their policy limit for amount borrowed for a couple of years. The comment goes on to say this is not the time to borrow for taxpayers to pay back. Michael, do you want to speak to that really quick?
I mean, yeah, it comes back to the financials that are released with the CDD don't make sense. They're not grounded in any reality that anyone outside of the core CDD programming at the Ed Graff's administration have put together. We don't know those numbers. And all of a sudden we know things are changing, especially at this time period. And now we have increased bus transportation costs out of nowhere for this year, no explanation. We have increased capital needs if you looked at the budget, it didn't make sense for how much it was going to cost to have to redesign a building that was made for 5th to 8th graders to all of a sudden be for kindergartens and to 3rd graders.
Yeah.
That's huge. You know, it's like the toilets don't even work for the students.
The physical space, yeah, that's
the physical space won't. And those are really big expenses, you know, and now we have this extra bond money that's going to have to be requested for the capital expenses, and no explanation. It's gross financial mismanagement, especially to the taxpayers and to board members. I mean, I've asked board members, do you have the numbers? And they're like, no, we can't get them, which is ridiculous. I mean, I think the state representatives, the House needs to come in and say, what are your financials? Because ultimately, if the school district goes down to bankruptcy, the state is going to be left holding the district, and we're going to be, the people who live in Minnesota and Minneapolis, I mean, are going to be in the midst of something that we knew we could prevent.
And in that comment, it says $500 million or $500 million. What is that referencing?
I'm not sure on that specific figure. I mean, we have, there's, I could pull up the number right here right now. It's like there was a certain amount of capital expenditures. Part of that is maintaining buildings that we have in the school district.
Yeah.
Another part is going to be used for redesigning buildings, renovating buildings. What else might be in there? We're not sure because it's not clearly laid out.
Yeah, and I would assume with a plan this big, you would want the numbers laid out. I'm gonna wrap on this really quick before we get to the basically the end here. How will dual language programs be affected? We spoke a little bit about this by the CDD.
Who, me or?
No, just anybody. I'm curious. We spoke about dual language programs earlier. How will they ultimately be affected by the CDD?
Yeah, well, we from 8 schools, 5 that were one way.
Yeah.
Eliminate all the one-way program and they go to a bilingual education program. So they combine 8 schools into 3.
Oh, I remember you mentioning this, but it's good. It's good for people to hear this now that maybe weren't in the beginning of the forum. So they go from 8 to 3.
Yes, and so they are not balancing where the Latino families live because 45% of the seats for dual immersion programs are gonna go to Sheridan, Northeast.
Yeah.
But 80% of Latinos are in South Minneapolis, less than 10% in Northeast. And the CDD, that I want to jump what to Nikima said about equity, that the CDD is destroying our communities in the name of equity. Imagine Green Central.
Yeah.
There is a one-way program there. So some of the students are gonna stay there, but the others are gonna need to go to other school.
And you mentioned Anderson is gonna have 1,500 students?
Yes, and about money, they said that they are gonna spend 23 million remodeling Anderson, because Anderson is a K-8.
Yeah.
And it's gonna be this huge middle school, 1,500 students with a strand on an immersion program. Strand is like 2 schools in 1 school, so doesn't work very well. And one thing that we didn't mention is that it's really hard to find teachers for the bilingual programs. And now the teachers, they don't know where they are going to end up. So we are going to lose teacher of colors with the CDD.
Yeah.
And we want the kids to see teachers that looks like them. And we are going to lose teachers.
And I'm glad we touched back upon that as well, because it's sometimes with this entire discussion, there's a lot of points that we brought up, and revisiting some of them really kind of drive it home. And with 2 hours to discuss this, which in the beginning, I myself was a little bit worried about that it might be too much time. It seems that we haven't had enough time to really get to everything. And I think that says a lot about the comprehensive district design that's being rolled out, not only for communities in Minneapolis, not only for parents in Minneapolis and teachers, but the students, the kids that are undoubtedly going to be immediately affected by this district design. And it sounds like there's so much going on that even within a 2-hour discussion, we can't touch on everything. So my challenge is to everybody listening or watching this down the line, and especially the school board members, to engage in discussion about this. And when you do that, be open to listening, because it sounds like there is a very formidable wall between the Minneapolis Public School Board and everybody else, is what it sounds like. And if I'm speaking neutrally, and to break through that wall, it sounds like there's going to have to be some concessions made for the people that are in a position of power, which sounds like the Minneapolis Public School Board, and also really some points of clarity, because it sounds like a lot of things, from the budget to how bilingual schools are going to be affected, to Anderson bolstering up to 1,500 kids, to only 10% of Latinx people on the Northeast side, to how are you going to balance and measure out everything? It's going to it sounds like it's definitely not something that's been continually or planned for through and through. So to get further information on this, you can go to kidsfirstmpls.org. You can look up Racial Justice Network in Facebook, Kids First MPLS in Facebook. And you can also go to Site Forums in Facebook, which kind of stands as a neutral ground for just people to speak on and talk about the issues that we've spoken to. I want to thank everybody for participating today, all the panelists for giving your time. Francisco Segovia, Zeinab Omar, Michael Dueñez, Nikema Levy-Armstrong, and Silvia Ibáñez. Thank you so much for giving your time and energy to this. And I really hope that we're able to have some kind of forum before May 12th, as this discussion seems to, if it can't be capacitated by 2 hours, it seems to definitely deserve another platform and time to have this discussion again. And if there's anything I'm leaving out, Nikema, Francisco, Michael, or Silvia, or Zeinab, please feel free to raise your hand. Otherwise, we will wrap up on that note.
Silvia has her hand up.
Okay, go ahead, Silvia.
I think something that we forgot to mention is that with the COVID-19, the schools are gonna be different next year.
Yeah.
So the CDD need to worry about that, how the schools are gonna be different next year. So if you hear the news about like California, that they are talking about like maybe doing like shorter school day with no kids eating in the school. Or I heard the news from Germany that they are gonna start classes with schools that have less than 100 students. Like how our schools are gonna be different, and we need to worry about that. No, like the CDD now, we need to worry about the trauma that our students are coming from, and how everything is gonna be so different next school year.
Yeah, it might benefit Minneapolis Public Schools and #our MPS to focus on next year as opposed to the CDD. And that does sound like a benefit of delaying the vote, because voting now, people don't know what July is going to look like, let alone October. So that sounds like it would benefit everybody. Anything else before we wrap up here?
I just want to say thank you to Toussaint Morrison for agreeing to host this forum. You did a phenomenal job allowing us the space in a public forum to speak our truth and to reach out to other people who might have questions or who feel the same way. That wouldn't have happened without you and your commitment. So thank you so much. To our fellow panelists, you all are phenomenal. I would be honored to be on a panel with you in the future, work with you. You guys are amazing. I'm thankful for your passion and your commitment to our kids in Minneapolis Public Schools. And thanks to everybody who watched tonight. Take time out of your evening to be a part of this conversation. Please help spread the word. Please show up when we do calls to action. Sometimes it might be showing up virtually, but get engaged for our children and the children of our future.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And thank you for having me. I really appreciate you reaching out, Nakima. Everybody have a great evening. And I think even after this is voted on, or when it's voted on, I think that having this and filming down the line when we can all meet in person would definitely be beneficial to the community. So thank you, everybody. And yeah, I'm going to sign off, and we'll be in touch.
Well, one last thing, Toussaint, before you sign off. Are you willing to host a forum like this with school board members and or MPS administration?
Absolutely, absolutely. Even though some of the language I've used has been somewhat slanted against the CDD, I would definitely be up for approaching it. Obviously, I don't know if I necessarily used entirely slanted language or leaning against it, but I think I would love to host a forum with Minneapolis Public School Board members just to see. To really get into the intent and communication behind their choices, because it sounds like on this end, the end that I've heard, there's not a lot of information that's been provided, and even from going to the website, that the fact that they have a CDD digest, like a weekly or daily blog that has to inform people, speaks to me as, okay, then how much information is being clearly communicated to the community? So I would love to host a forum with them, yes.
Wonderful. Thanks to some folks in the comments were asking, and there are some school board members watching.
All right, great. Cool.
That invitation is open. We hope you guys will take us up on it. Thank you.
All right. It's showing backwards, but thank you for watching, everyone.
Yeah. Goodbye, everybody. Yep.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.